anniversary, Ash Wednesday, Valentine's Day. Gary, what's going on?
Nothing much, Charlie. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's a good week.
I
What about
remember
you?
last year you did a hard fast.
That was on Good Friday,
Oh, that was on Good Friday.
I
Okay.
believe,
I think
but
right. Yeah.
I did not do a hard fast this year. I will do one on Good Friday again, but
Wow. Good for you.
I'm still hungry. I've noticed a lot, especially with the new training stuff, that it's it's harder than it was last year when I wasn't doing it. So just gotta wait till tomorrow and keep praying for strength and got the ashes at the most beautiful church in the world today. So,
Mm. Good for
you
you.
know, not much to complain about. What about
No,
you?
not much to complain about. I was able to go out to Saints Peter and Paul in Naperville for Ash Wednesday. It was
Nice.
very nice. Packed mass, packed. So Ash Wednesday is one of those days where the Catholics come out of the woodwork. So even if you're nominally Catholic, you want those ashes on your head.
I'm 1 for 40 on the snooze button. I'm giving up the snooze button.
Yeah, you've had to deal with it 40 times already?
No, I'm
Oh.
saying I conquered today.
Oh, I see. I was gonna say 40 times in one day. What's
I
going
just
on?
woke up. I just punched the alarm. I
And
just
then
got out of bed. I said, not, not, not on the first day during Lent. No way.
Right.
Not getting me. I think I'm gonna do it though. I believe in myself.
You got
So
it. You got it.
I think so too. And that's like a habit that if I can if I can become a morning person, it's starting to really happen these last
Hmm.
6 months. I'm starting to because I never used to be. If I could beat that sun up, I'm gonna be dangerous.
Yeah. Very good.
So we got a good show. Talking, I mean, we can't stop talking about James Delingpole, but wanted to talk first of all because last week it feels like a lot longer than a week ago. But
Yeah,
a
isn't
week
a
ago,
week in
oh my
2024
goodness,
is like a month
it seriously is. We're
or a
living
quarter.
in just the slowest times. With just like you said, I feel like months are like years.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
these people, I hear people like, can you believe it's already almost March? It's like, yeah, I can. Have you following the news? Like a week ago, just to backtrack, a week ago, we were talking about Tucker Carlson just announced that he's going to do a Putin interview. There's all of these sanctions on, I don't know if you call them sanctions, actually. There's these, he's become national enemy number one to Ukraine. And
Transnational enemy.
yeah, and no one even knows if this is going to drop. Well, we were talking about worst case scenarios, about Tucker Carlson being the next Julian Assange,
Right.
about him not, ever coming back to the States.
That'd be quite a sell if they were cellmates, though, wouldn't it?
There would be some good stories to be a fly on the wall
Talk
in
about
that,
interviews there. They'd be
to be
interviewing
a,
each other.
to be a fly on the wall in that
Hmm.
jail cell. That'd be pretty crazy.
Hmm.
Tucker drops it with Putin. I know your basic reaction, but I want to hear you talk it all out because it came up a lot for people around my age too, which is kind of surprising, but it
Sure.
was nice talking about it, especially because it's something that we obviously out about this stuff. So I wanted to hear your take.
Yeah. Well, I listened to it as it was happening, or as it was dropping in real time. So, well, I listened to the entire thing, and it was bewildering at first. And Tucker prefaced before the entire interview was aired, he gave an introduction about how Vladimir Putin is going to go into a 30-minute explication of early Russian history. And that was confounding to both Tucker Carlson and many observers who are listening to it because Tucker's intent was from the onset to really get into the reasons, the casus belli of the war in Ukraine, why he launched the invasion in February of 2022. And so, or was it 2023? I'm losing track. It's got to be 2022, right? So I can't remember. Was it 2022 or 2023? Again, my calendar is all screwed up.
It had to be 2022.
Yes. Okay. So I'm not imagining things. All right. So yeah, of course it couldn't have been that much. Do you want to check for me?
Yeah, I will, because if this is
As you're doing
2023, that was the longest calendar year of my life.
Yes, I agree. I'm pretty certain it was 2022.
February 2022.
Okay. Phew. Well, that's a relief. So the I I understood that what Putin was doing was advancing Russian propaganda and doing so effectively. And what came across to me being a Europeanist, that is to say, someone who studies and has worked within European history as a concentration, is that this was the Russian modern current equivalent of Otto von Bismarck in Prussia in the 19th century. So, as Otto von Bismarck, the Prussian minister, chief minister to the king, Wilhelm I, ascended to power in 1862, he really was dealing with a country that was very much on the ascendancy in Prussia and would be dueling with Austria, the other powerful German state, to see which one of the two would lead the process of German unification. That was the Hegelian Geist or spirit of the age in the 19th century. Large national unification of disparate provinces that would have at least identified somewhat as either German or in the case of Italy, Italian. So you have these movements toward Italian and German unification. In order to accomplish that, he was, let's say, Otto von Bismarck, was a master snake serpentine politician. He was able to assess and always had his finger on the pulse of what were the major movements that would be transformative within Prussian society and then later German society as he advanced the cause always of Prussia. And then, should German unification come about, it would come under the auspices, the German state would be under the auspices and control of the Prussian king rather than any other possible usurper or Austrian claimant or something like that. So in 1862, he gave his famous Iron and Blood speech, and that had this ring of real strong Prussian, German, Teutonic nationalism and force. It sounds as though Nietzsche could have written the speech, and this appealed very much to the conservative nobles, especially the Junkers in Prussia, because what Bismarck was posing himself as the chief minister of Wilhelm I was to eradicate radical ideas that were emerging at the time, like socialism and communism, but also he was against liberalism. So, contrary to the ideas that we so aspire to, or more so, we have espoused in our own philosophy, worldview, and ideologies about, and those ideas of the 19th century, the classical liberal ideas of Adam Smith and David Ricardo, and the like, whom Ludwig von Mises himself had a great deal of respect for in a classical liberal sense of allowing the diminution of government to therefore produce great flourishing by the free exercise of the marketplace and thus a lifting up of all boats, if you will, but a lifting up of people through engagement within the market and within true capitalism. Well, Bismarck is rejecting that, and he sees that there's a definite and pronounced role for the state in leading, guiding, shaping, and even, again, giving preference to certain elements within Prussian and then German society. Now, why what this type of politicking that Bismarck engaged in, whether it was in foreign policy where he was a real trickster, or whether we're talking about domestic policy with the support he gave over to, for example, welfare and insurance programs. As you know, Charlie, because we speak of it a great deal on this podcast because it's a particular focus and interest of yours, public education for the first time. all of these programs that were state safety nets, he was the true advocate for and the man most responsible for their advancement. And this was not because he had any great concern about the lowly peasant in East Prussia or Brandenburg or anything like that, or any of the lesser German states once Germany was unified under Prussian control, but rather because he knew how to diffuse all of these political movements and then make them impotent in opposition to the state, and the centralized state that would all power emanating essentially from Berlin. So I want to share with you just a quote from, or a few excerpts from that first speech of 1862, in which he spoke in a very conservative, this strikes me as very neocon, but it's just conservative back then type of language. He says this from 1862 in this in a speech before the Reichstag as he became minister. It is true that we can hardly escape complications in Germany. Although we do not seek them, Germany does not look to Prussia's liberalism, but to her power. The South German states, Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, would like to indulge in liberalism, and because of that, no one will assign Prussia's role to them. Prussia must collect her forces and hold them in reserve for an opportune moment, which has already come and gone several times. Since the Treaty of Vienna, that's the Congress of Vienna, our frontiers have not been favorably designed for a healthy body politic. Not by speeches and majorities will the great questions of the day be decided. That was the mistake of the revolutions of 1848 and 1849, but by iron and blood. Wow. So here Bismarck is espousing a true Prussian and Germanic nationalism and contrasting Prussia, which has its own form of conservatism and state, I wouldn't say worship, but uh, highly a high respect for the power of the state and the king and the ministries of the government, with the supposed laissez-faire liberalism of the other minor German states. And so he's juxtaposing them and saying, well, one's going to be deemed historically, and this is where he sounds like Hegel, one's going to be deemed historically inferior, and the other one's going to be deemed historically superior. And he's saying this to the Prussian Reichstag in the midst of a social Darwinistic and nationalistic age. So what do you think the conclusion of the delegates to the Reichstag is? That well, really the liberalism and the capitalism and the free market enterprise of the German states with their tiny governments and non-intrusive governments are going to be the ones that emerge triumphant? No. Okay. This is propaganda by implication, and he was a master at it. So then later on, as the more socialistic and even what we could call kind of state conservatism started to really pick up steam and almost become out of control, well, Bismarck has a recipe to forestall any of their advancement. And what he does is he diffuses that pressure within Prussian society and just starts handing out social welfare. And once he hands out social welfare, people are like, wow, the German state is advanced. It's not leaving things to the free market or to institutions within German society that might provide welfare or assistance, and he's certainly not leaving the operation of the German economy to the free market. So what does he do? He says this, think about how different the tone is here. Give the working man the right to work as long as he is healthy, assure him care. By the way, this is in the 1880s. I'm sorry, this is in the 1870s when he's giving out all these programs, which included, for example, retirement benefits and pensions to workers in the peasantry. If you do that and do not fear the sacrifice or cry out state socialism directly, the words provision for old age are uttered. If the state will show a little bit more Christian solicitude for the working man, then I believe that the gentlemen of the Weiden, that means social democratic program, will sound their bird call in vain, and that the thronging to them will cease as soon as working men see that the government and legislative bodies are earnestly concerned for their welfare. And then he goes into this whole long diatribe about how all of the outreach, all of the welfare, all of the beneficences of the state, the opponents of this will cry, "This is state socialism." And he'll just say, well, it's socialistic, but it's not socialism. And what socialistic means, and this is what's really going to screech like nails on a chalkboard to you and I, state socialism is just Christianity.
Ew.
Yeah, exactly. He goes on to say the whole matter centers in one question. Is it the duty of the state or is it not to provide for the helpless citizens? I maintain that it is its duty, that it is the duty of not only the Christian state, as I ventured to once call it when speaking of practical Christianity, but of every state. Do you see how he's conflating and then artificially wedding without the consent of Christianity or the churches, the mechanizations of the state? And within his own vision, of course, he was no friend to the churches, especially to the Catholic Church. He launched what's called the Kulturkampf, which was an open suppression of the Catholic churches in Germany. But yeah, he saw that the state could be weaponized and mechanized to replace and take on the charitable and philanthropic activities of the churches, and thus therefore gain their energy and the people's allegiance to the state instead of the churches. He was a real manipulator. Now, why do I go into Bismarck and Putin? Let me go on to explain that. What you saw in the Putin interview was, yes, Russian nationalistic propaganda. So what Bismarck was, as a master of what was called Realpolitik, like realistic politicking, whatever kind of lies, scandal, murder, espionage, you name it, needs to take place to advance the interests of the state. He was willing to pursue it, both in foreign and domestic affairs. So, too, you see that within Vladimir Putin. And that's why it's not altogether confounding to me that he went into this long explication of, excuse me, Russian and Ukrainian history, or Russian history vis-a-vis the Ukrainian people, and seeing them really as just the Ukrainians are just an extension of the Russians. That's how he presented it throughout the interview. Well, what Bismarck was to a Tatism or statism, that's what Vladimir Putin is to Russian nationalism. Note that throughout the interview, he never says, "I'm a strong defender of the Russian nation, and I'm going to do everything I can to ensure its health and progression." But that's exactly what he was doing. And I have to give credit to Rob from Avoiding Babylon. He put a tweet out. He said, "I don't know if I like Vladimir Putin or I dislike Vladimir Putin. I don't know whether I should fear him or respect him or both. But I will say one thing. I wish we had one leader in the United States that spoke with such authentic affection and knowledge of both the history of the United States and her people, as Vladimir Putin speaks of and is aware of, at least selectively, the history of his country."
Yeah, that was my take.
Yeah. So, well, it's also, I don't fear Vladimir Putin. I recognize, like good ANCAP, that our enemy is in the municipal government, in the township, the county, and the city, and then down in whatever state capital you're residing in. I'm sorry, the capital of whatever state you're residing in, and then ultimately in Washington, D.C. Those are our most imminent threats. I don't fear Vladimir Putin. See, so what I can do is look at him and assess that what I do take away from him is this man can wax poetic for 30 minutes. Yes, again, picking and choosing what elements of the historical account to emphasize. But can any of our leaders do anything close to that? I mean, are they capable of a realpolitik in which they can make a historical, albeit filled with, almost absurd nationalistic propaganda of this founding mythos of the Russian people and how it affects current events and the war with Ukraine today? I Who can do that? We have a real genius as the head of state of Russia, and we have real dunces and incompetence as total incompetence within our, unfortunately, state apparatuses.
Yeah.
So those are my major takes.
Nice. I didn't know you were going to have the Bismarck quotes ready to fire. So that was
Hey, this is
good.
the hot water history
No,
podcast.
I
You
know
know
you.
that.
You come ready. You come ready.
You got to come armed,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Man, I was just listening to that. You kind of mentioned this already, but I was thinking, Putin, that guy is like a real G. Like that dude's like,
Mm.
I wouldn't mess with that dude. He had that sense of, and obviously we haven't gotten this from a leader in at least, I don't know, at least 4 years, where you could just tell that, especially when he was chirping Tucker
Not being in the CIA.
about getting turned out from the CIA, he owned Tucker for at least those 15 seconds.
Yes, I think whatever the motivations and the intentions of Vladimir Putin and getting that message out to whomever would listen, American, Russian, everywhere in between, he was successful, very successful.
Yeah.
And I thought one of the most poignant points within the interview was when he was talking about how when he met with Zelensky, that is to say, Putin met with Zelensky, and he said in this one meeting, he's like, Vladimir, your father, your grandfather fought against the Nazis. And what are you doing now? You're their emissary. You're their puppet. I mean, how can you do that?
Yeah.
And that really, well, it had the impact of reminding everyone that as much as Biden and everyone might want to drone on about defending a democracy in Ukraine, they're doing the most anti-democratic and anti-liberal and anti-freedom and human rights abuses abound there in the most corrupt nation in Europe prior to the war. It certainly is still today, even worse, exponentially so. So it reminded us of that the absurdity of these people saying we're defending a democracy in Ukraine is ridiculous. But then it also reminded me too, is like, well, there is a benefit when you consider that Putin, albeit with very brief intermissions, has ruled over Russia since 2001. So there's a consistency there. You know, as Hans Hermann Hoppe has always said, of the superiority of monarchy, not the superiority of monarchy over anarchy, but the superiority of monarchy over polity and certainly democracy is simply that we know who to blame. There's
Hmm.
one person or there's one head of government to whom we can direct our anger, our angst, our disquiet. But in a democracy, it's just like hot potato. You just hand it off to the next person. And as Putin has had to deal with everyone from Bill Clinton to George W. Bush, and as a CIA officer, he knew well the activities of George H.W. Bush. I mean, this guy goes back a long way. So he's just an incredibly skilled politician, and he's when people say, well, Trump's playing 4D chess, and even the most ardent Trump backers are like, oh, I don't know about that.
That's a good
But
point.
but Putin's playing 4D chess, and the
That's a good point.
ramifications are all. The final thing I want to note about the Putin interview, and it was a piece that actually Tucker put out today, is did you see where he went into the beautiful train station in Moscow?
And he talks about how it's just nicer than
It's
anywhere here.
gorgeous. And Moscow as a city, he just had a speech in Dubai in which he said these it was disconcerting to him that in Moscow they have it's clean, it's safe. There's no crime, there's no problem with migrants. There's not a homeless epidemic or drugs aren't being used out on the street, and there's certainly no defecation on the sidewalks. And sure enough, he goes into this train station. He's like, "This is gorgeous. It's all classical." And you know what the sad thing was? It was built by Stalin, and
Mm.
there's an dedication to Lenin that's still in the train station, right? But it's
Wow. Yeah.
I forget what it's called. It's Kishkaya. I forget train station or whatever in Moscow. And I'm thinking, man, I haven't been on the L in a long time. I can't remember the last time I was on
It's
the L,
not pretty.
but the Chicago transportation system is just there's no way you could feel comfortable, safe.
It's avoidable.
It is definitely to be avoided.
Yeah.
So that reminded me of that's what he was accomplishing was the kind of obvious, can we go out so far as to say obvious at the present moment, given its fruits, superiority of Russian culture to the American.
Oh yeah.
And what's fascinating too is that you can only really point to, as someone will say who's listening perhaps and has heard me before, heard us before, we might say, well, they always blame the state, they always blame the government, but you could really only blame one entity for this. It's not, there's not some inherent sickness that's intrinsic to American life or American culture or history. I mean, that's what the racialists would like to say, the Ibrahim Kendis of the world, was that, well, of course, because this nation was founded on the backs of slaves and 1619 Project and all that, this is why we suffer from these debilitating cultural epidemics or sicknesses, and that's why you have all uh, these problems ranging from decadence to poverty, and then and the like, or breakup of the family structure and the like, whatever it is, crime, economic disparities, you name it. Okay. But I mean, I would argue there's nothing inherent in it. It's just that the state has done a masterfully destructive job of making the cancer of whatever it might be, socialism, centralization, envy, greed, rewarded. And the culture is a reflection of that, or the ramifications are there every time you ride the subway. Malfeasance, just a state autocracy and kleptocracy that's always there. The perpetual wars, the drug addiction, the suicide rate among veterans and the like. I mean, and then of course that came to an absolute head during the COVID crisis or during the COVID hysteria that was manufactured. So, and climate change and the drug war and the war on poverty.
It's insane.
It really is
The
to the point
psyop
where
doesn't stop.
the psyop doesn't stop, and it's so unrelenting too. You wonder maybe eh, it's almost to the perhaps complement of American culture, history, civilization, if you want to go so far as to say it, that there's still some embers left of it, that it hasn't been totally extinguished, given all the all-out assaults that its gigantic centralized bureaucracy has launched against it, foreign and domestic.
Let's talk James Delingpole,
Yeah.
our guy,
I feel sometimes that
your long lost British brother,
he's
older
my
British
long
brother.
lost English. brother. Yeah. I I just can't get enough of James Delingpole. The thing is, I felt as though when we were talking off air prior to the show about speaking about another witty and important entry on the part of Delingpole, not this time a Substack piece, but and not his podcast, that I'm afraid that Hot Water History is just going to become like the podcast that riffs on the Delling pod.
Yeah.
But I don't care.
We're
I
we're slowly becoming that.
I don't care because our last episode was about his interview with Bob Moran, and we've had him and mentioned him on several different episodes before. So when you have the best podcast in the world and you're one of the smartest men in the world and most observant and by far one of the most awake, then you're going to get our attention. You're going to get our attention.
How to put an awake person off Christianity.
Mhm.
We're not gonna read this whole thing, but
No, and I
that's the
want
title
to,
of this stack.
yeah. So there were several parts that I wanted to highlight, and it starts right there, Charlie. If you could page down to the one reason for this is, yes,
Yeah.
there, right there. So it reads, or Delingpole writes, one reason for this, i.e., how it's very difficult to sell the awake, the red pilled, if you want to call them that, as he says here, on Christianity. Well, it's because they are awake. So he says the one reason for this is that the awake or red pilled, call them what you will, are by nature skeptical of everything. In a way, healthfully so, or healthily so. Is that healthily a word? In a healthy sense, they are skeptical of everything. And that definitely includes organized religion. For them, Christianity, at least potentially, is yet another of those things we have taught wellish to believe as true, meaningful, and real, but which turns out on closer examination to be yet another gigantic psyop, maybe even the biggest psyop of them all. And so if you looked at 9/11 or the Kennedy assassination or even more obscure ideas like Paul is dead, by the way, there's a theory that Paul McCartney is dead, which I almost subscribe to. I'm pretty sure that's true. Why should the religion that has dominated Western thought and culture for over 2,000 years be off limits? Wow. So when you go ahead and you say to an awake person, and this is reminiscent of our previous episode about, well, is it easier to convert
Oh,
libertarians?
I was wishing you didn't bring this up.
Oh, sorry.
I was wishing I would be the first person to bring this up, but go ahead.
No, I stole your thunder, so you roll with it.
Is it easier to make a libertarian Catholic or is it easier to make a Catholic libertarian?
Right.
So this is a win for me.
This would be more of a win for you, definitely, because it's once you put up those, or once you drop the scales from your eyes. Sorry for those who are awake who are agnostic or atheistic or antagonistic toward Christianity. But I'm going to use a Christian reference. If you take the scales or Judeo-Christian reference, if you take the scales away from your eyes and you start seeing the confounding, I keep using that word confounding because I like it, but the gigantic mess of psyops that are out there, as you said, Charlie, before, unrelentingly assailing us, and the institutions that are operating as governmentalities or the ones that are just nefarious, globalist, Masonic, satanic actors. And it's all apparent. Their agendas are out there. Klaus Schwab writes the book, The Great Reset. Noah Harari is talking about transhumanism in the most, I suppose, persuasive or open forums or what persuasive ways in open forums with no fear of retribution whatsoever, or with no way he's not recalcitrant at all. And so you see this all going on, and you could say, well, how is it that a 2,000-year-old institution is still around, kind of having an effect? And the other thing that Delingpole considers, like, when you're in the awake crowd and you happen to be Christian, well, then it's very easy to turn to that if you're not Christian and you're awake and saying, Well, this guy's somewhat awake, but he still hasn't removed that final scale from the eyes. I mean, come on, man, wake up, right? And he goes on to say here, this is a second great paragraph. He says, when you go, oh, wait, he mentions the Jesuits here. So when you go down this rabbit hole, you'll find plenty of evidence to support this thesis, more often than not involving the supposedly Catholic Jesuits. I was so happy that he put supposedly in parentheses there. You'll also come across copious research claiming to debunk Christianity, skepticism as to the authenticity and credibility of the key scriptural texts, the theory that Christianity is, in fact, just another Jewish plot, claims that Christ never really existed or that he is merely an archetype derived from older religions. In fact, Charles, you texted me or messaged me just last week. It said, "Hey, have you heard about this Christ and Dionysus comparison? Can you help me out with that?" And I had never heard that one, but of course, that he has all of these similar birth stories with some pagan gods and the like. Okay, so this is part of it. And then perhaps it's just, that is to say, Christianity or Christ himself is just a rebadged version of the Egyptian god Horus. The Old Testament God is actually Satan, and so on and so forth. And he just keeps going on. He says, then there are the appeals to liberty, rationality, modernity. Christianity is another cope designed by man to deal with his fear of death. Christianity is patriarchal, misogynistic, homophobic, controlling, hierarchical. I've yet to see a bad thing yet, but and we're in the list, and worryingly out of touch on the issue of animal rights. Christianity is a primitive superstition which places undue credence on the existence of the big sky fairy. Christianity can't be right because how can you reconcile this notion of a loving God, thanks Stephen Fry, with parasitical worms that eat the eyes of innocent children? Christianity, with its outrageous claim that no one comes to the Father except through me, is discriminatory, elitist, cruelly indifferent to all those other marvelous religions out there whose yogis and Sufis and mystics seem so refreshingly chilled, wise, and based. Now, Charlie, having read the piece, what's his answer to this as someone who's ardently Christian, does every third episode on an analysis and exegesis of the psalm? I'm talking about Delingpole here, and yet certainly is still awake and even open to being more awakened by the day, hour, and minute. What's his answer?
Well, there's a lot left, but I think the strongest point is he talks about the biggest opponent and the one that Satan fights the most against is the church.
Yeah.
And that Christianity stands so far in the way that Satan doesn't even, compared to the Catholic Church, Satan doesn't even care about, I mean, he doesn't say Catholic, but compared to Christianity, Satan doesn't even really care about the other religions that are out there.
Yeah. I mean, and all of the terrible institutions and things, whether we're talking about the aforementioned Klaus Schwab and the World Health Organization or the World Economic Forum or the Masons or the satanic cults, the baddies are all a lot. They recognize the great challenge to them is getting rid of this benevolent, loving, merciful, transformative God who brings peace, who brings a satisfaction of what Ludwig von Mises calls in human action, that perpetual uneasiness that irks the soul. He says human action in an economic sense is aimed towards satisfying that. Human action in a spiritual sense, from the perspective of all of the nefarious actors that are in our world today, has to be directed away from this God who says, by your virtue, by your faith, hope, and love, by my salvific sacrificial act on the cross, you're to be saved. This world is not your end.
Yeah. He talks about coming on too strong as Catholics, or
Mhm.
I keep saying
Christian.
Catholics as Christians. That's something that I think we both probably struggle with. Hence, a book, website, and podcast about it. But also just I think our personalities. I know I do at least is come on too strong when people are at least curious about Christianity that either aren't believers or have left the church for a while.
Yeah. Do you love that response to when he says, "Of course, I recognize that for some non-believers."
Okay, this is what I was laughing at. These next two paragraphs.
You go ahead and read.
Of course, I recognize that for some non-believers, even the merest mention of Christianity qualifies as coming on too strong. That's very true.
Yes.
That's very true.
Right.
There's some people, non-believers, that are almost filled with demons that if you even mention it, they'll say, you can't, you're forcing your beliefs onto me. Even
Correct.
when it's obviously not force at all, you can just say, you don't know what the word force means.
Yes.
For example, when I have one of my podcast chats with my brother Dick about our latest adventures in Christianity, there will always be the odd complaint in the Rumble comments about how boring it is and why can't we talk about something else. The reason I'm laughing is because in my head, I'm reading this as James Delingpole with the
Hmm.
accent and stuff. My Christian
Bad
answer to
pacing.
such people is bleep you, he bleeps it, bleep you and the horse you rode in on. Or maybe if I'm in more polite mode, why not go and listen to Trigonometry instead? I'm sure you'll find it much more up your street. This isn't a religion thing, nor is it heaven for friend, an evangelizing thing. Rather, it's that the entire point of my podcast, as ought to be bloody obvious, bleeding obvious by now, is authenticity. My house, my rules. If you don't like me talking about Christianity or fox hunting or my memories of Oxford or my interrupting the podcast to take a call from my daughter wanting more money or to let the cat through the window or to put the dog out or hearing Dick talk about military reenactment or World of Tanks, I'm not about to go, oh, that's a good point you make there. From now on, I'm going to talk about veganism, Tartaria, and the fact that we're living in a simulation. Will that do you?
Now, can I interrupt here? I thought that's such a brilliant point because desperation really, the stink of desperation when you're evangelizing really is odious to the non-believer.
Yeah.
So rather than as he always avoids in his both both private life, I suppose, although because he talks about it, so I guess it's not too private. But then also in his personal life, living out as a Christian, his public life, is that none of his espousal or when he talks about Christianity ever comes off as needy. Like I need you to come in. No, and this is what I remember telling this to a bunch of would-be Dominicans when I was still a Dominican, and I had to give a speech to them about why you should think about joining the order or really discern whether God's calling you to the priesthood. And I said something to them. I said, you're not out there. You shouldn't be out there begging as if you have something you're trying to sell that's deficient to people. Rather, know that God's called you to some great heroism and that if you were to preach that, the gold, the great jewel or pearl, to use Jesus's language, then you you don't undersell it. You just say you and you certainly don't oversell it. But you what you do is you say this is of great value. Take it or leave it. You know, it's like no salesman worth his salt is going to try to like hype up what something is and make it sound as though he needs the sale.
Right. I'm just gonna keep reading these two
Go for it.
paragraphs.
Yeah.
I love this part. The reason I do mention Christianity now and again is that I find the subject fascinating. Indeed, it may be the rabbit hole to end all rabbit holes.
Damn.
Certainly, it ought to be at least of passing interest to any vaguely curious person, of which all the awake are by definition, because it addresses or claims to address all the big questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What happens afterwards?
And Christianity in its best, at its best, from its origin to its greatest proponents, never did so sheepishly. They do so boldly, and then they live out with definitive purpose those beliefs in, as he mentions, the purpose of his podcast, in the most authentic of ways. I mean, I think of Ignatius of Antioch on his way to death in the forum, or wherever he died. I forget where exactly he died. I think it was in the forum when he was attacked by the wild beasts. And he just, to the amazement of even his own captors, was the effusive fortitude of the guy, saying at one point in his letters, "Don't come and forestall my passage to the heavenly kingdom. For I was born and put on this earth to serve the divine king, the God made man, and may the animals sharpen their teeth with my bones." That, there's nothing Ignatian, and I don't mean Ignatian in the Loyola sense, although he was authentic too, but there's nothing Ignatian of Antioch in people going out and saying, well, you really need a personal relationship with our Lord and Savior. That's cheap. It's cheap. It's tawdry. It's like selling trinkets.
Yeah.
When you're selling the message of salvation to the entire world, and that the second person of the Trinity became man and died for the remission of sin, so that you might have eternal life. You're not selling a trinket. The next believer who comes in, which never is going to happen for especially the awake, with that approach, you don't just put a notch on your little church pew saying, oh, I got this one.
Yeah. This is why I want to talk more about Catholicism and Christianity. Like I remember talking about that being something I wanted to talk on the podcast more when we were just doing, not just doing, but doing more history stuff. You just feel your vibration rise, or your mood just boosts.
Yeah.
At least mine does.
Well, do you want bring this to a close in the way only James Delingpole Substack could?
I don't know. What do you mean?
Well, just say, I mean, what's the final conclusion? I mean, he just has these last few paragraphs that you are the great takeaways from this.
I'm still confused. Do you want me to read the last couple of
Yeah,
paragraphs?
read the last two paragraphs.
Okay.
Or
Let me
wait,
read the.
start with "Herein lies."
Yeah, herein lies the trap for so many, awake and non-awake alike, but perhaps most especially for the awake, because it's a message so perfectly attuned to their skepticism of authority, to their powerful sense of curiosity, and to their understandable conviction that with just a bit more research, a bit more deployment of their mighty, no-nonsense intellect, they can finally get to the truth.
Capital T.
Capital T. Which is why so many of the most brilliant people in history have bought into the serpent's lie. Why not? On the face of it, it makes so much more sense. Who, after all, would choose the subservience, apparent passivity, and all too often agonizing martyrdom of Christianity when the alternative is to join the elite group of clever rich people who have acquired the hidden knowledge by which they can transcend coach class and travel perpetually first?
Oh, brilliant.
To answer that question, you only have to look at what these people do in order to get there. They must lie, deceive, live a double life, operate in secret, cut themselves off from and exploit those of their fellow humans who don't make the grade, develop facets of their personality which most of us find instinctively discomfiting, such as cunning and slyness and ruthlessness. And that's before you get on to the really dark stuff.
Yeah. End. Period. Fin.
James Delingpole, you floated.
You floated again.
You floated.
Floating with the angels, James Delingpole. We love you.
That wasn't James Delingpole. That was God
Working through James
writing through
Delingpole.
James
Yeah.
Delingpole.
That's a powerful guardian angel transmitting those messages. I'll tell you that much. Yeah, I love that piece. What hit me like a ton of bricks was that end of the first paragraph that you read was when you said to their um understandable conviction that with just a bit more research, just a bit more deployment of their mighty no nonsense intellect, they can finally get in touch with the truth. Wow. I mean, the you have to drop the hubris. That's why Aquinas said that humility is the gateway to faith, right? You have to drop the pretense that you can, as Delingpole mentions earlier in the piece, that you can be uh, fooled by Satan and still live, or cooperate with Satan and still live with uh, the audacious claim that you can be a god, right? And so reject God himself. And oftentimes it's through that ego or the inability to understand that as Jesus has this great line when he's in the dialogues of Saint Catherine of Siena, where she has a direct conversation with Christ in this mystical experience. He often starts with every time they talk, he says, "Remember that I am God and you are Catherine," and that was a a refrain in her prayer life from that point on. Remember that I am God and you are Catherine. I
Yeah,
love that. Put you in the proper place. But your proper place is an heir to the kingdom. That's the thing. Your proper place is not that you're some, as evolutionary science would like you and the world would like you to believe, that you're just one kind of grain of sand or one cog in the machine or just this insignificant little bone or piece of ceramic in a mosaic. No, to God, you're everything, right? But know that you're without him incapable of being an heir. Without him, you're incapable of being anything but that grain of sand.
yeah.
And that's the rabbit hole of rabbit holes right there.
It is the rabbit hole of rabbit holes.
And uh, can do you think that, just before we move on to everyone's favorite segment, do you think that you and I are just kind of naturally drawn to both our faith and anarcho-capitalism because it is so contrary to Normiville? I mean, are we just naturally disposed to that, so therefore we like it? We revel in the being the other, being the outsider.
Thought about this a lot, and I don't know if I have a good answer. I'd like to think that I would still be, a faithful Catholic, even if the scoreboard was flipped, I guess you would say,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
But I don't, you never really know.
It's a counterfactual. Yeah, we wouldn't really know.
Yeah, but I
All I
do
can
think
say
about that a lot.
all I can say is, just for my own life, is that I never thought of myself being a Catholic, being a nonconformist when I was younger. But then it dawned on me probably by about high school that being an ardent, faithful, devout Catholic was
I
so
felt that's
so
that's a similar way.
rebellious.
Yeah.
And
It's like
rather
a
than that,
goody two shoe. You drop the goody two shoes
yes,
rep,
right.
and you really get into the martyrs and stuff, and
Yeah,
Peter hanging upside down.
right. And
And
then life shits on you a bit, and you realize, well, there are forces out there that are causing the shitting on you.
yeah,
Uh, so do you just throw your hands up in the air and just concede, and then become, as Delingpole had mentioned, become the snake, become the the
Serpent's line.
liar,
Yeah.
the deceiver, just so you can fit in? Or do you embrace one the one who was rejected ultimately on the cross? I embrace him all the more. So
I think the ANCAP stuff, there's definitely a little piece of it being so countercultural. Like,
and all the more reason to see the synergy between the two, the complementarity.
yeah, but I think that, like, especially getting into it, there's a part where it just feels more quote unquote, I know this is
Rebellious.
a history, but like more American, just thinking about the rebellious stuff and the Boston Tea Party and, telling King George to F off. And
Yeah,
there's some of it.
but even then, you look at how far you have to go back for that,
No, I
right?
know. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get to a place that's not as high as the gates.
Excellent. Here we go.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
And a little scary on a serious note to start off. Shooting threat shuts down OPRF High School twice today.
Hmm.
Students at OPRF High School were placed on a quote, secure and teach lockdown, which, do you know anything about what a
Secure and
secure
teach.
and
Just
teach?
keep them in their classrooms and keep on teaching.
Because I was gonna say a fifth period secure and teach lockdown, that kind of just sounds like fifth period. Like what's the difference? How or did we lock the doors?
DEFCON 4 is
Yeah, right.
secure and abuse.
After threats made through a popular social media app circulated through the community, right before noon, the high school was placed on a soft lockdown called Secure and Teach. They just literally said the same thing twice. After reports of a student claiming to have a gun and threatening to shoot inside the building during a class period that had already started, the threats were made through Snapchat. Okay, thanks for this is one of the worst written pieces of the year. They didn't have much time to edit this.
That's true.
Quote,
Not good on the fly.
we were in lockdown originally during fifth period, and then they called it off, said Jade Neese, a senior at OPRF. Then again, during sixth period, they said we were going to have it again because someone said they heard a shot fired outside in the hall. According to Dan Yapchik, Chief Communications Officer for the Village of Oak Park, the Oak Park Police Department were sent to the high school and remained on the scene, but were not requested to enter the building.
Whoa.
The lockdown was lifted at about 12:29 p.m. after OPRF officials deemed the threat was not credible. So that's at 12:29. The second lockdown went into effect at about 12:39 after a student who was outside on the mall reported hearing shots fired. Officers then went to the scene. In photos obtained by Wednesday Journal, the threats made on Snapchat included at 11:56, everyone is going to die. I have a gun in my bag, and I will shoot the school up during fifth period today.
Mm.
The lockdown ended at 1:49 p.m. after officers determined that no shots had been fired. Quote, consequences will be issued in alignment with our behavior education plan. Despite students being, this is great. Despite students being told to head toward their seventh period class, many, including Jade, left for the day and were picked up by concerned parents who had already begun gathering outside the high school in an attempt to communicate with their children. Wow, scary day.
Yeah. Let's get back to isotopes. What a great place. What a great learning environment, right?
Unbelievable. Isotopes. Many parents who were able to get their kids on the phone told them to leave for the day. Quote, their lack of communication is irresponsible, said Melissa, who asked not to have her last name included. It is not acceptable, not when it comes to our children. Also, Take social media threats seriously. We don't want to find out the hard way. We know that receiving notice of a secure and teach can be extremely alarming, and that the time between updates may seem excruciatingly long. Parker said, our priority is always the safety of our students and staff. While we are investigating to determine the facts of a situation, we are not able to respond immediately to emails and calls from parents. Parker added that once the district has the accurate information, they communicate it to the school community as quickly as they can. That's it for that one.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy though.
Yeah. I feel sorry for those kids that were stuck in secure and teach and those 5th period chemistry, or oh, we're going into 6th period chemistry.
The
now?
best part, the worst part too, is they have to go back to school and they still go to Opera.
Yes.
You know,
Go Huskies. That's gotta build community when there are death threats from someone in the building.
yeah. I mean, I feel like we've talked about this so much, but Oak Park okays more money for migrants, rental housing in a split vote,
Oh,
right?
Ravi.
I was looking for him. I was just skimming this. This is a super long article. I'm not going to read all of it. The board approved the additional amount. This is towards the end. I'm not going to describe all of it. The board approved the additional amount of 150 grand, with trustee Ravi Parakat, Wesley, and Robinson voting against it. Robinson and Parakat both expressed their distaste for using taxpayer dollars to fund migrant aid.
Oh God, we gotta get Ravi on, man. We gotta get him on outreach. For anyone who is listening to the podcast knows Ravi. What's his last name? Penakar?
Parakat.
Parakat.
The
Yeah,
thing is,
anyone who
we're
knows-
going to have him on, and we're actually going to be so disappointed that he's actually a communist too.
Yeah,
But he's just not, you
he's
know.
just more of a concerned communist.
Right. Yeah.
A fiscally conservative communist.
Right.
Right.
I'll reach out to him.
Okay, good.
That would be a great episode.
Oh my
Just
God.
meanwhile in Oak Park for the whole thing. Just Robbie, give us the skinny here. What's really
Yes,
going on
yeah.
behind closed doors? Anyways.
So Chapel Magruder, she's a bitch, right?
Yeah. Okay, so according to the officials, 132 asylum seekers remain in the village's temporary shelter program at the West Cook YMCA and the Carlton, and will likely continue to do so until the end of the month. After that, the asylum seekers may be able to stay at St. Edmund's School, pending the finalization of a few agreements until June 30th. Man, I'm not gonna lie, this sounds a lot like 2 weeks to slow the spread.
I was just gonna say I wasn't gonna steal another thing from you, but that's 2 weeks to slow the spread.
Yeah, so they got the grant and they're discussing where the money goes.
Crazy.
The board approved 100. Okay, so I apologize. The board also approved with 6 votes in favor and one abstention, allocating 300 grand from a SMAS grant supporting municipalities for asylum seeker services grant to the community of congregations for migrant rental assistance. That state funded grant awarded Oak Park 1.9 million earlier this month. So this 150 grand is on top of that.
So we're already over 2.
Right. For short-term rental assistance for migrants. And that
Say,
comes
how long is that?
and
That's
that
not
comes
gonna last.
That's directly from village funds. That's not a grant.
Oh, okay. But how long is that 2 point whatever million gonna last? That doesn't last very long.
I mean, you got 132 people in the Carlton and YMCA. You know, I don't know how much with food and
Yeah.
everything. I
I
don't
know.
know. Okay, last one. This is a pretty good one.
Room service?
Yeah, what if these guys are just like, what if they're just acting like kings in there?
Yeah, they're taking the champagne glass and just throwing them against the wall.
They're wearing a robe.
But it's on backwards because they don't really know. Or they put their legs in the armholes or something.
Yeah. They've got butlers.
How do you say cannonball in Spanish?
Divisions over Israel-Hamas war create tensions at OPRF High School.
Oh boy.
3 teachers' actions have led a parent to call to remove them from some positions.
Mm-hmm.
Tensions are high at OPRF High School, reflecting global strife over the war in Gaza, as pro-Israel and pro-Palestine students and parents report unfair treatment, bullying, harassment, and feeling unsafe at school. The school, for example, has received 16 formal complaints since October 7th, but 8 were anonymous complaints and therefore not investigated, officials said. 5 complaints were determined to have already been dealt with. Of the 3 remaining complaints that were investigated, 2 alleged anti-Semitism and 1 alleged harassment of the school's Middle East and North African student group. Those, a spokesperson said, were followed up in a manner that, quote, focused on taking an educational approach, preserving the dignity of all involved, and ensuring a safe learning environment. Okay, sorry. I thought that was actually going to be something of value there.
Yeah.
The situation, however, escalated at last week's school board meeting after one parent called for the firing
Uh-oh.
of one teacher and the removal from advisory posts of 2 others amid allegations of perpetuating anti-Semitism, racism, or misinformation about the war. You need to know, quote, you need to know that your Jewish students at Oak Park and River Forest High School live in a climate of fear.
Oh, here we go again.
Amy Gorelnik, the mother of an OPRF sophomore who received hostile comments from another OPRF student last fall toward the board. Arab and Muslim students also have reported fears for their safety and of bullying. At the meeting, OPRF Superintendent Greg Johnson and Board President Tom Kofsky acknowledged that it has been extremely difficult to navigate the strong feelings exhibited by students and families on both sides of the war. But they said the school's goal is to support all of its students as best it can. Quote, this is by Superintendent Johnson, I, along with members of my team, have met with dozens and dozens of community members in different formats and groups as we are trying to better understand not only what is going on in our community and how it is affecting our students. Like Johnson, Kofsky said the months since the attack have been very difficult for the school to navigate as it tries to support all of its students who are suffering pain. Quote, people are hurting and we are hearing it from multiple sides, Kofsky said, adding that the war has brought pain to a number of students and divided the community. Quote, this is an issue that is toxic and it's unfortunate that issues that exist from the other side of the world, people are bringing into our community for a reason, for all valid reasons, and then using that against their brother and sister in our school, in our community. All right, let's take a time out here.
This is the same thing like they want to stay away from greenhouse gases in Oak Park.
Right?
Yeah. It's like, why don't they just build the dome already and make it Oak Park Biosphere?
But parents and community members said the district has not done enough. And then this next section's called, this article is super long, man. I'm not reading all of this.
No.
I'm going to try to skim through it. A call to fire a teacher over social media posts. In his first request, the father of 2 OPRF students called for the school to fire Anthony Clark. Here we go. Over what he said he believed were anti-Semitic social media posts. During the public comment portion of last week's meeting, Melman of River Forest said that in January, Clark inaccurately posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, that the OPRF student who in 2018 airdropped the image of a swastika at a school assembly was Jewish. Clark's post was part of an exchange with someone who is apparently a former OPRF student. Okay, so it goes to this Twitter thread. So this teacher The airdrop in the auditorium, remember that? That
Mhm.
was a Jewish student, Clark posted on X. Doesn't change the anti-Semitism is horrible and wrong, but I don't make things up, especially when I was one of the primary people standing against it. The student who airdropped the swastika is not and was never Jewish, according to Oak Park Temple Rabbi Max Weiss, who helped, along with the boy's pastor, counsel the boy after the incident. Johnson. I don't think this was I don't know if this was a direct attack,
Okay.
but this sounds like just like a piece of shit white kid that meant to airdrop it to his friend and accidentally sent it.
Oh,
sent it to a
You're
teacher.
you're
And
condemned to 60 hours with a rabbi and your
yeah,
pastor.
and all of a
Oh
sudden,
no.
this sucks.
If anything's gonna make you a Nazi, it'll be that experience.
Johnson also told Wednesday Journal that his understanding is that the student who airdropped the swastika is not Jewish. So there's
It's
this,
Jewish adjacent.
yeah, right. Melman also noted that Clark in January reposted a tweet that cast doubt on evidence that Israeli women were raped by Hamas attackers.
Wow, how is that? He just raised the specter, if you will, of or the idea that this is Israel propaganda. How is that anti-Semitic?
Listen to this. Clark also reposted a tweet from someone called Megatron saying Israel stole, quote, half the organs from dead Palestinians.
Mm,
It was
okay.
widely acknowledged. Listen to this. This is where the fact checkers come in.
Okay.
It was widely acknowledged after a December 2023 New York Times investigation that Hamas used sexual violence against women. There is no evidence that Israel is harvesting organs from Palestinians. It is, however, viral misinformation taken from 2009 when an Israeli pathologist acknowledged that they did take samples from dead people, including Palestinians, without consent, something they said ended in the 1990s.
That's amazing.
When a teacher posts that a Jewish student airdropped a swastika in an assembly, but it's clear that it was a non-Jewish student who did it, when a teacher reposts that Jews steal organs from dead Palestinian, and when a teacher reposts that Jews were not raped on October 7th, we as a community need to hear from you, Melman told the school board. We need to hear you speak immediately and forcefully, denouncing such rancid posts and ensure the community that you're on it.
Taking sides. Take our side, school board.
Johnson and the school board, as is typical during the public comment portion of the meeting, did not respond to the comments of Melman or other speakers. Clark has not responded to inquiries from Wednesday Journal made by telephone, text message, and email. Clark, a special education teacher at OPRF, is a community activist who has twice run unsuccessfully for Congress against Danny Davis.
Oh man, I
in the
already like
Senate
this
district,
guy.
and finished last among 6 in a race for Oak Park Village trustee in 2021. Yep. He's getting an email from us.
It's good. Him and Robbie, the same podcast.
Okay. Sorry, I have to read this part.
Okay.
Did you have something to say?
No, just the whole idea of that somehow putting all of these diverse communities and their children into one school and forcing them there by coercion. That in and of itself is such a ridiculous idea and in no way contributes to any real feasible, realistic aspiration toward harmony. Like, why would you think that this would work? Why would you think public schooling would work or that this is even reconcilable? Right?
Yeah. No, I mean,
It's just insane.
DEI is a lie, just like what's her face said at
Shannon
the
Adcock. Yeah.
yeah.
Good for her.
DEI is
In
a
Oak Park
lie.
West. Oak
In
Park West.
Oak Park West. Defining anti-Semitism. This is the last
Mm.
segment of this article. Students and parents, including speakers at the meeting, such as Temple Har Zion Rabbi Adir Glick and a current OPRF student, raised concerns about the climate at OPRF as it concerns Jewish students and called on the school to define anti-Semitism. Many have been pushing for the school to define anti-Semitism. Like, who fucking writes an email saying define anti-Semitism for me so the whole community can get on board with this?
Look it up on Webster's.
And to explicitly prohibit it as part of the school's diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. They have met with administrators who, they said, promised action, but so far nothing has been done. Quote, here we are in February and the OPRF administration has achieved nothing as far as I can tell, said Renee Slade, mother of junior Alana, who was in Israel October 7th as part of a study abroad program and later evacuated. The thing that stings the most about the MENA supporters petition, I don't know who MENA is, we skipped that part, is its one-sided view that we need language regarding Islamophobia, but not anti-Semitism, she said. My family and other members of the Jewish community have been allies to other marginalized communities. We've listened to and supported and voted for and donated to support Black and Brown lives, immigrants, economically undeserved populations, and others, and now we're looking at trauma and pain and misinformation and discrimination. And instead of support, community members are blaming Jews and saying that we don't need protection and specifically asking that there not be a definition of anti-Semitism. So I'm here today to ask you, the board and administration, to take a yes and approach. Yes, we need to adopt a definition of Islamophobia and anti-Arab racism. And yes, we need to adopt a definition of anti-Semitism. Yes, we need to support Islamic students. And yes, we also need to support Jewish students.
But how can that be? You can't have it all those ways.
Rebecca Levin, a member of the anti-Zionist group Jewish Voice for Peace and the Group Committee for a Just Peace in Palestine, Israel, and one of the people who spoke at a January school board meeting, told Wednesday Journal she doesn't believe OPRF needs to define anti-Semitism. Quote, I don't think we need to come up with a definition of anti-Semitism. I think we have a very accurate and well-used definition, which is hatred or discrimination against people because they are Jewish, period. Levin said.
Well, what is the purpose of the school defining?
No,
What is
they haven't even gotten to that. They haven't even
Okay.
said that that's anti-Semitism to me. I think the reason that there's considerable concern about this is that there has been a purposeful conflation of the terms anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli or
Yes.
anti-Israeli government. And the
Yes.
notion of anti-Semitism is being used to weaponize people who are fighting against the criticism of Israel.
Boom.
We got some emails to send out tomorrow to the
Yeah, we sure do. Good
to
for
the,
this.
to the Oak Park area.
Oh my gosh.
Johnson and Kofsky said they don't think it is necessary for the school to adopt a definition of anti-Semitism because current policies prohibit discrimination based on religion, among other
There
factors.
you go.
Our thoughts about this have certainly evolved, Johnson said. This is an incredibly, incredibly complex issue, not only here locally, of course, but globally, and finding the right way to work through this issue that has layers upon layers and is very much tied to people's identities, their passions,
Blah, 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 blah.
how they identify themselves both individually and culturally. Our approach has to be, and it has been, to meet with people, to
And
listen,
continue to have the conversation.
to listen to and engage in conversation,
That's great.
and only determine really a path forward after we gather as many voices and thoughts as we can.
You know, it's funny, the simple solution is staring them in the face, but they'll never admit to the elephant in the room, and that is just to have separate classes to
Yeah.
create safe spaces
Yeah.
and have segregated areas of the building. There you go.
Kofsky also said he believed the school's existing policies are adequate to handle all kinds of discrimination. Quote, we can always make it better, but I'm not seeing that as a solution or a need here.
Can you imagine a kid walking through the halls, the sophomore? It's like, all right, are you going to go to the Zionist wing or are you going to go to the pro Arab wing? He goes, I just want to go to lunch.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to class. I just want to go to lunch and get these 4 years of my life over with as soon as possible. Right?
Yeah.
Poor bastard. That poor bastard.
That's meanwhile in Oak Park.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
You know, we joke about this. Obviously, we have our fun, and you know, it's the end of every week is just making fun of these people. But I sincerely pray for these people and their
I feel
the
terrible for the
kids
kids.
and their parents.
Yeah.
But especially the kids.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. They're trapped there. They're the guinea pigs in this social experiment that no matter how much it fails, no matter how much abuse and degradation of the human spirit goes on within its walls, they're just going to keep going because it's the American public it's the American church is the as Tom Wood says, the public school system or the idea of public schooling, so yeah. And think about the millions and millions of victims as a result.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
truly is. And I mean, I get fired up about it. Obviously, you called that out earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It's everything Delingpole said.
Yep. Never stops. There you go. Speaking of never stopping, we're moving closer and closer to having Tridentine Brew products in our hands. The march moves on. We shall overcome the distributor problems and stuff like that and licensing. And sure enough, we'll be drinking Trinity. So please go to www.tridentinebrewing.com to get some merchandise in anticipation of getting all the beer that'll make your life just better and you a better person for imbibing it. So,
No,
anything else, Charlie?
that's all I got.
Well, thanks for Delingpole and thanks to Delingpole and Vladimir Putin for giving us even more material
And
than
Tuck
before.
and the Tuck.
And the talk
He's
and
probably I said it last week. He's got to be one of the gods now to dropping this with such high leverage. I know we've
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
at a week to simmer down,
I
but
think he was on the GOAT list before the Putin interview, but now look out. And going to Dubai and saying that American cities are shitholes compared to other ones around the world. It's patently obvious. It's true.
yeah.
It's bold nonetheless to say. So, all right. Until next week.
All right, everyone. God bless.